Demario Douglas absolutely popped off in fantasy football this week. A lot of people are wondering, what do I do with him on my fantasy football team if I'm lucky enough to get him off a waiver? So let's have a discussion about Demario Douglas, who a lot of people coming into this year said that Demario Douglas was going to be a sleeper in fantasy football. And by my calculations, they were probably correct. Demario Douglas he was the leading wide receiver for the Patriots last year, which means pretty much nothing, but it does mean that we've seen at least some NFL upside from Demario Douglas. Obviously, last year was his rookie year. He's his second year this year, and so far he's played with Jacoby Brissett, and you haven't really seen a lot yet, right? Most of the time he's playing around 60% snaps coming into this week, and you had 3 points, 0 points. You had a 15-point game where he had 9 targets, 7 receptions, 69 yards, which was a nice game for him.
Very nice.
You had 4 points against San Francisco. And then 12 points against Miami. Again, 9 targets in that game with Jacoby Brissett. But this week was a little bit different. He posted his highest yardage mark of the season. He had tied for his highest amount of targets. He had 6 receptions, and he had a touchdown today. But the main difference from a contextual standpoint with Demario Douglas was that he was playing with Drake May. And my guess is Drake May is probably going to be the starting quarterback for the New England Patriots the rest of the season. I think he's going to keep that job. I think they're going to want him to develop. And I think this means a lot for Demario Douglas moving forward. Coming into this week, he was the wide receiver 69, which is nice.
But
not really. And so with Demario Douglas, he wasn't somebody that was rostered, and rightfully so. He was rostered in 14% of sleeper leagues coming into this week. My verdict on Demario Douglas, with the upside that you saw from him today, with the new quarterback situation, even though the offense is terrible, right now, I still think he's a hold. I don't think you can sell Demario Douglas for anything worth anything. I mean, essentially you'd be selling him for waiver dollars at this point because, again, you're going to be getting him off of waivers this week. And once you do get him off of waivers, I think you're going to be holding him. And I think it's for the upside. A lot of people are hurting really bad at wide receiver in fantasy football because of injuries or because of people who are consistently underperforming. And Demario Douglas in an offense where you really don't have a dominant wide receiver one there, right? You have Keke Coutee, which if my memory serves me correctly, I'm pretty sure Keke Coutee did something today.
Yep.
Keke Coutee had 15 points because he had three receptions and a touchdown. That's quite the blast from the past. I also think Kendrick Bourne, he had 3 points today, but he's back on the field. Kendrick Bourne was supposed to be the wide receiver one from a contract standpoint for the New England Patriots because they grossly overpaid him. And yet you've got Kendrick Bourne there.
And you've got Jalen Polk.
You've got Jalen Polk there, who is a rookie. You've got Javon Baker there, who's a rookie who hasn't done anything yet. But even looking at Polk's production, Polk has been playing, 60, 70, and then 80, and then 100% of the snaps. And even when his snap percentage increased, the production did not. You saw him get an increase in targets with 7 targets and then 6 targets in week 4 and 5, and then 4 again this week. But again, receptions, 3 receptions, 1 reception, and 1 reception. So what that's telling you, and what you should probably be looking at in the advanced analytics for Jalen Polk, is what type of targets is he getting? This wide receiver room, again, I just named it Coutee, Bourne, and Polk. And while I super believe in Jalen Polk long-term, I really, really do.
Yeah.
Short-term, I think Pop Douglas is the wide receiver one there. And again, having the wide receiver one in a bad offense doesn't do a lot for your fantasy team. You don't feel super excited about that. But this is a guy that's 23 years old. Like I said, it's only his second season in the league, and you just saw him play with a brand new quarterback in rookie Drake May. Mm-hmm. I do think that Demario Douglas is not going to score 21 points every week. I do think that. And I think that's fairly freaking obvious, right? Mm-hmm. However, in fantasy football, you are constantly looking for league winners. And most of the time when you're getting league winners in fantasy football in later rounds, what ends up happening is they are young wide receivers. Demario Douglas fits this bill. And I think if you have Demario Douglas, he is somebody that you are holding on your fantasy football team because of the upside that he does present as a young wide receiver on an offense where there's now new opportunity that you could potentially see get a little bit better with Drake May at the helm. Demario Douglas, good hold for this week.
Yeah, and then Zay Flowers is just strung together 2 phenomenal weeks after looking like potentially he could be one of the disappointments of the fantasy year with where you are investing in him in the preseason. But I mean, 9 targets, 9 receptions, 22 points for the man after having 12 targets, 7 receptions, over 100. He's had 2 straight weeks of over 100 receiving yards. The crazy thing about this game against Washington is all of his production came in the first half. He did not get a single target or a single reception in the second half. 9 targets, 9 receptions, 132 yards in a half. Like that's nuts. That's absolutely nuts. But with Zay Flowers, there has clearly been some concerns here, right? Because you saw that week 3 and 4 stretch against Dallas and Buffalo. Let me reiterate, Dallas and Buffalo. He had 5 points and 2 points. If you remember the Dallas game, it was very, very odd because Baltimore was up fast, very up quick, and they were really just trying to run out the clock at the end of the game, trying to keep Dallas from coming back in and potentially winning that game. And Derrick Henry just went absolute bananas. It was a vintage Derrick Henry game, right? Which you're going to get. You're going to get a lot of a decent amount of times this year for Baltimore where everything is just run through Henry. He's going crazy. They just give him the ball and they win with Derrick Henry in totality. Then you got the Buffalo matchup, which Buffalo has a good defense. It's a tough matchup overall, and they end up winning that game. But Zay Flowers, again, only gets 2 targets in that game, 1 reception for 10 yards. Those games, in my opinion, were not built for Zay Flowers. I think Zay Flowers was made for more of the matchups against Cincinnati and Washington, who you just saw, who have less ideal defenses, less ideal matchups on the defensive side of the ball, but easier for Zay Flowers to put up numbers like this. I think you're going to see some of this come down to earth when he goes up against teams like Cleveland in week 8, Denver in week 9, Pittsburgh in week 11, the Chargers in week 12. But you also have some sprinkled in there like Tampa Bay, like Cincinnati again, like Philadelphia in week 13. I think we have to come to grips with the fact that Zay Flowers might be a little hit or miss this year. And I think it's okay. I think that's okay because when you see the upside of what he is capable of doing production-wise, he has only scored 1 touchdown this year, and that was good for a 22-point game. He has scored 0 touchdowns in weeks 5 and week 6, and he's dropped 19 and 22 points in full PPR formats. The dude's a target hog when the game's built for him. And again, the game is not always going to be built for him. But at this point, with this sample size, this information that we have to date, I think that's kind of baked into his price. So I'm of the opinion that Zay Flowers is a hold. I'm not going to go out of my way to go buy Zay Flowers like crazy because people are going to try to upcharge you with his 2-week stretch here. I would not be selling him though either because he is going to continue to have really solid games like this, even if he posts a couple duds here and there.
Yeah, I would lean hold with Zay Flowers as well. I mean, when we looked at the analytics before this year, Zay Flowers is somebody that historically, when you put up a rookie season like that, you tend to get a lot better in your sophomore season and a lot more fantasy productive.
And he has.
And you're going to see him jump up into the wide receiver 2 range in terms of production after this week on the whole season. And I think you nailed it. I mean, Washington has given up the 6th most points this year to fantasy wide receivers. The Bengals have given up the 13th most points. And so these are both a little bit more favorable matchups that were both high scoring. And Zay Flowers is going to thrive in an environment like that rather than, Dallas and Buffalo. While even though some of those games were high scoring as well, they just decided they weren't going to use Zay Flowers. And so I think Zay Flowers you categorize as a hold. Now, one guy I would say is probably going to be a buy for me actually is Devonte Smith. Devonte Smith missed the Tampa Bay game. He had the bye week. So it had been 2 weeks since you saw him in action. And he came back this week and had a 15-point game against Cleveland. Now, do keep in mind, Cleveland is a pretty good defense, right?
They gave up a lot of production, though.
They did give up a lot of production. And coming into this week, they had given up the 11th most wide receiver points, actually, in fantasy football. And so Devonte Smith, the main difference you saw from him this week rather than the first 3 weeks he's played is that he had 4 targets compared to 8, 10, and 10 targets in the first couple weeks. My guess is that this is because they were easing Devonte Smith back in because he came off an injury and because I think, quite frankly, when you're looking at that game, it was a little bit more of a rock fight, and I don't think you saw, especially with A.J. Brown coming back, I think you saw a little bit more of a shift towards A.J. Brown because you didn't see him in some of the early games this season. But I also think that Devonte Smith, in terms of targets, he had the 2nd most targets on the team with Grant Calcaterra as well with 4 targets, and then A.J. Brown had 9, and nobody else had any more than that. And so there were only 24 targets to go around today. And again, that's why I think that is the main thing that contributed to Devonte Smith having not 8 to 10 targets today. But when you're looking at what he's done when he's been on the field this season, 15 points, 20 points, 14 points, and 15 points. Devonte Smith has been a high-end wide receiver too when he's been on the field this year. And so what this tells me about Devonte is that I think in an offense where you're going to have somewhat inconsistent quarterback play, but consistently be in games where the offense is going to have to throw the ball, in a quarterback where Jalen Hurts is fairly capable, I think Devonte Smith's a little bit undervalued right now. When you're looking at the rest of season rankings, expert consensus over on Flock Fantasy, he was being valued as a mid to low end wide receiver 2 rest of season. And I think there are a lot of guys around him that you just feel a little bit less comfortable with than Devonte Smith, who has proven that he is an elite talent in the NFL and that he can be really good this year even. Brandon Ayuk was ranked ahead of him going into this week, which I would assume changed, but if it doesn't, I mean, that's the guy you're taking over him, right? Cooper Kupp even, there's a ton of risk with Cooper Kupp. DK, he's more consistent than DK is so far this year. Moving down below Devonte Smith, You've got guys like Brian Thomas, DJ Moore, T. Higgins, Devontae Adams, Chris Olave, Puka Nacua, Terry McLaurin. I think you can make a case for each of those guys to sell them for Devonta Smith. And so, I've always been in the opinion that Devonta Smith is one of the most talented wide receivers in the league. Obviously, you saw last year that he took a little bit of a step back compared to what he did in 2022, where he was absolutely electric. But believe it or not, I know you're going to hate this. I think Kellen Moore might have been decent for Devonta Smith's fantasy value.
Oh, Kellen Moore is fine for fantasy value.
Yes. So
I just can't stand him as an NFL OC, and they look awful. They look awful. They almost lost to Cleveland.
So that is the other encouraging thing is even though they look awful, Devonta Smith is still producing.
Yeah.
And he's doing it without touchdowns. He's only scored 2 touchdowns in the year. So he scored a touchdown in half of his games, but again, the games he hasn't scored a touchdown, he scored 15 and 14 points. Mm-hmm. And so with Devonta, I'm comfortable buying him. I think you could probably down tier from somebody to get Devonta Smith as well and feel pretty good about it because I think there are some guys that are probably wide receiver 2 level guys in Chris Godwin and DK Metcalf, in Cooper Kupp and Jaden Reed. Devonta Smith isn't, in my opinion, too far off from any of those guys at all. If those guys are, again, ranked ahead of him on Flock Fantasy, if you can down tier to him from those guys and get something on top, I'm feeling pretty good about that trade. So he's a guy that I think I'm going to be comfortable buying this week in fantasy football.
Yeah, and you did touch on Brandon Ayuk there, and we are going to talk about Brandon Ayuk next. It's been a roller coaster of emotions with Brandon Ayuk for all y'all Brandon Ayuk owners. He, had his breakout game after starting really slow to start the year. He had 22 points against Arizona, 12 targets, 8 receptions, 147 yards. We said, hey, very happy that he was able to do that. Expect, regression back to more sustainable production against tougher matchups against tougher defenses like Seattle. And lo and behold, he drops 6 points for 4 targets, 2 receptions, 37 yards. I mean, that was less production than even I expected, than I think any of us expected from Brandon Ayuk. Because the volume went down, the opportunity went down, right? No, he not only was he not explosive, he just straight up wasn't getting opportunity. Jawan Jennings out-targeted him. George Kittle out-targeted him. You had running backs, like multiple different running backs, straight up outproducing Brandon Ayuk. It was bad. It was really, really bad. And I think at this point, you're looking at the matchup outlook for Brandon Ayuk. You're like, can this get any better? Can we have any sort of Arizona type matchups to spark this Brandon Ayuk production? And hopefully you can get some momentum and do this consistently for the rest of the year. I'd say no. Kansas City, Dallas are the next 2 matchups, and they got the bye. And then after the bye, they've got Tampa, which is good, and then they've got Seattle, Green Bay, Buffalo, Chicago. I mean, at this point, Brandon Ayuk is looking like one of the worst high-end picks in the draft at the moment in fantasy football in 2024. It's getting that bad. Again, I don't want to overreact because we are only 6 weeks into the season, but guys, that is more than a third of the way into the season, and Brandon Ayuk has cost you games. When games matter more than they ever have, when playoff implications are on the line more than they ever have, when the margin for error and the margin for players laying duds like this is much slimmer than it was to start the season, because you probably have a lot of losses because Brandon Ayuk hasn't been producing. All of that to say, mentioning the matchups, mentioning the lack of production, all that to say, I feel like very few people are interested in Brandon Ayuk at this point, and if they are, they're going to try to lowball you for him. I think you got to hold Brandon Ayuk, and you just got to hope that his volume can start to become more and more consistent, and that he can start actually freaking producing consistently. Consistency is the name of the game, and Brandon Ayuk, when you drafted him in the second, third round, you expected him to do that. He's not doing that at the moment. I can't tell you to sell him super duper low. I just can't. It's too good of an offense.
All right. This is not a good offense that we're going to talk about next, because it's the Tennessee Titans offense, and it's Tony Pollard. And the reason we're talking about Tony Pollard is because week 4, and you're doing that, but we're going to get into this. Week 4.
Oh, you don't have to tell me. I've done plenty of research.
Okay. Because I'm going to lead with this.
A lot of flukies.
He's not playing the Dolphins and the Colts every week. That's correct. Part of the reason. Now,
and a garbage time touchdown against Miami.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, granted, to Tony Pollard's credit, because we were very high on Tony Pollard. And I think this was because we knew that Tony Pollard was going to be the lead back from a volume standpoint, and he absolutely has been. He's gotten over 60% snap share in every single game he's played. He is the lead back in Tennessee. Not to mention, another thing that Tony Pollard has going for him now is you had Tyjae Spears go out with a hamstring injury of all injuries. That is one you really don't want to see for running backs. And so, if anything, I mean, they don't have really anybody else there that is going to challenge Tony Pollard for a major share in that backfield.
The Spears injury is huge.
That is a big one. Because without the Spears injury, I'd probably look
say so.
at the last 2 games and say, look, Miami, they've been bad. Indy is awful. Awful. Worst run defense in the league.
Yeah, they're terrible.
And you talked about the fluky touchdowns. He's only gotten 2 and 3 receptions in the last couple games. I'd probably just say, you know what? Right now, we'll just move off of Tony Pollard and sell high, which is what I did after week 2 when I sold him to Nathan and I swapped him for Aaron Jones. Now, since then, you've seen him again score a lot of fantasy points.
It ended up being a lateral move.
It ended up being a lateral move, which at the time, to be fair, I thought it was a lateral move too. Like that's what I said. But with Pollard, I think right now he's a hold. I'm not gonna probably go out of my way to buy Tony Pollard for this reason. I'm not huge on buying running backs in bad offenses. It's the same reason. It's the same reason I won't go and buy Alexander Mattison right now, or Travis Etienne, or Tank Bigsby, or any of those guys, because they're all sucky offenses. And running backs in sucky offenses, again, Tony Pollard has been fortunate because he's had a touchdown in 3 of his first 5 games. That's probably not going to happen moving forward.
This is how bad the Colts' run defense is. It was a 3rd and 19.
I know.
A 3rd and 19 where they knew they were going to run the ball, and he scored a touchdown anyways.
Yeah, he broke like 3 times. They don't tackle. So again, the competition's not going to be the same for Pollard, even looking forward. We got Buffalo in week 7. You've got Detroit in week 8, and then you've got New England in week 9, not to mention the Chargers in week 10, Minnesota in week 11, Houston in week 12. I mean, you're talking about 4 or 5 of the best run defenses in the league right there. Right there. Detroit has been really good against the run. They lose Hayden Hutchinson, maybe. Buffalo, their defense is always good. New England, their defense, typically good, has been worse this year. The Minnesota's run defense has been top 3 in the league. The Chargers' defense has been good. Like, it is going to get tougher for Tony Pollard.
I wouldn't expect league-winning production from Tony Pollard from here on out. Probably just a nice little consistent floor with maybe even a couple duds here and there. It depends on if he gets a touchdown or not.
Now, do you know who he plays in week 15 and 16?
The Colts.
He plays the Colts.
And the Jaguars.
And he plays the Jaguars in 17. And in 15, he plays the Bengals. So now that I'm feeling pretty good about, right?
Nice little buy low playoff pickup there that we're probably going to have in the future.
So that's why I think Tony Pollard's a hold, because he is going to get enough snap share in the next couple games to where, because of Tyjae Spears' injury, that I think he's going to be fantasy productive even against some tougher defenses. I think he's going to have touchdown upside at the very least, and that's why you hold him. But when you get to playoffs, very favorable playoff schedule for Tony Pollard. Mm-hmm. So I would hold Tony Pollard right now. I wouldn't try to sell high. If Tyjae Spears were healthy, I think I would try to tell you sell high. Right now, I think Tony Pollard's a hold. And I think if you have him on your team, you're feeling pretty darn good because he's actually probably won you a couple of weeks with some of his production recently. So hats off.
Naji Harris has been a roller coaster this year as well. Again, why we're talking about him in the buy-sell hold. He had a nice showing against Las Vegas. 20 points, best game of the year. 14 carries, 106 yards. He had 7.5 yards per carry. By far and away, the best efficiency he showcased all year, and really one of the better showings he's had in his career. It feels like he had a touchdown, not a lot of receiving work, but again, overall a really solid day for Naji and Pittsburgh overall. You might disagree with me on this, but I am going to. There's a couple reasons I'm going to lean sell on this, and that is there are some caveats to this. Number one, is there actual legitimate interest in your league for Naji Harris based on this production? If there is, then I think you can go further and see, hey, can I actually sell him? If you got guys that are just trying to lowball you and get him at a discount, or you've got a league that's just not interested in Naji Harris, you're probably going to be forced to just hold him. But I do want to look into this production for Naji Harris, because you're looking at how the splits were. You've got Naji Harris with 31 total snaps, 27 of which were early down work. He had 3 goal line carries to Aaron Shampklin's 3 goal line carries as well.
Hey, he's respectable.
You had, for total plays, Jaylen Warren just behind Naji Harris's 31 with 25. Naji's 27 early down workload with Jaylen Warren's 14. Jaylen Warren had 2 short yardage opportunities, which outdid everyone else on that team. The third down usage was 8 opportunities, 8 snaps for Jaylen Warren to Naji's 1, and miscellaneous or no running backs 1. So you actually still had, Naji being the majority opportunity back from a carry perspective, with a lot of the valuable opportunity going to some of the other backs in that backfield. So you've already got a pretty even split across all the running backs there, not to mention Cordarrelle Patterson at some point is going to be back, and Arthur Smith can't help himself. He gets so giddy when he sees Cordarrelle Patterson Wilson on the sideline. He has to put him out on the field and give him some opportunities. That is going to happen by default. Another thing that I want to highlight here is Justin Fields' rushing capability. Consistent rushing capability is a concern long-term for me. Not because it takes away from Naji Harris. I think it actually opens up the field for Naji Harris. And I personally don't expect Justin Fields to be the starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers for the rest of the season. That could be a hot take. People could disagree with me on that. That's totally okay. I just see Russell Wilson coming back, continuing to rehab his ankle, coming back healthy. Justin Fields had 14 completions and 145 passing yards against the Las Vegas Raiders, who are banged up and look awful. I mean, we were just talking about potentially benching Justin Fields after a showing against Dallas the week before, and Indy the week before that, and the Chargers the week before that. I mean, he's got the Jets in week 7. He is going to be the laughingstock of the NFL next week against the Jets. I'm serious. They're going to make him look awful. And then everyone's going to be talking about Russell Wilson. And then once Russell Wilson's on the field, I don't think their running game is going to be as effective as you saw with a matchup like this against Vegas. Not to mention that efficiency. Again, I said 7.5 yards per carry for Naji Harris this week. You know the efficiency that Naji has showcased the weeks prior? 3, 1.4, 3.8, 4, 3.5. Again, very similar to some of the production for some of these other guys that we're telling you to sell. You generally don't bet on the outlier showings to be the future showings for guys like Naji Harris. 7.5 yards per carry is not something that Naji Harris is known for doing, and I doubt he's going to be able to consistently sustain for the rest of the season. Not to mention the quarterback controversy, it's going to be in limbo all season, and you've got a bunch of guys that are fluctuating in that backfield overall. So keep that in mind. Shop Naji Harris. See if you can't sell him at a premium.
And last but not least, let's get to Cole Kmet. And in the games where Cole Kmet has scored a touchdown, he has averaged 25 points a game. He has had 2 games where he scored touchdowns, 25 points and 24 points. In the games where he has not scored a touchdown, 8 points, 6 points, 6 points, and 1 point. Now, things are looking better for Cole Kmet than they were at the beginning of the season, because at the beginning of the season, it looked like he had completely lost the job to Gerald Everett and that Shane Waldron was just going to run Cole Kmet straight into the ground. Obviously, this has changed. And another thing that has really changed that would be stupid not to mention is that this offense does look significantly better. You have to keep in mind that the offense has played 2 very bad teams 2 weeks in a row. That is part of the reason why Caleb Williams have looked better. Caleb Williams was never dead. He's still very good. He's still going to be a very good quarterback in the NFL. But it's part of the reason why you've seen some of these guys produce. The main thing with Cole Kmet, in the game where he had 25 points, 2 main caveats there. Number 1, he had 11 targets that day and a touchdown. But the 11 targets, you're like, okay, wow. But the caveat there is he was playing the Colts. And a lot of that came in the fourth quarter in garbage time when they were down 2 possessions. Correct. And then the caveat with the 24-point game is he was playing Jacksonville. And also, his targets weren't really any more than they have been all season. 1, 5, 3, 4, and 5 outside of that 11 target game. And so again, he had 5 targets today, but that's been within plus or minus 1 of the entire season. He did have 70 yards, but he had a couple of big plays, and obviously 2 of his 5 receptions were touchdowns. And the thing about touchdowns is that they're the most volatile statistic in fantasy football. And like is the case with Sam Laporta, and like is the case with Mark Andrews, I would rather just stream tight end and get anything I can for Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet, I'll just sell. If you can't get anything for Cole Kmet, you hold him. But I'll label him as a sell because, like I said, I'll shop him and see if I can get anybody that's even close to flexible at running back or wide receiver. And if I can, I will ship him off for those types of guys. Yep. So there you go. Buy, sell, hold for this week. Hope you appreciate the video. Make sure you drop a like. Make sure you're subscribed as well. Really helps us out. But we appreciate you guys so much. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you later.